Hello everyone, I'm Javier Cifuentes-Faura from the University of Murcia in Spain. It is an honor to participate in this conference as a keynote speaker. Thank you very much to the organization for inviting me. Today we will talk about economics with a lecture entitled New Challenge in Economics After the Ukraine-Russia War, Transparency and Accountability. Economists have to deal with natural catastrophes and unexpected events. Urgent responses are needed in this situation, which can prevent future economic recessions or larger fiscal deficits, and deal with such problems as immigration and social care. The government needs to be able to respond effectively to a catastrophe and needs to do so in a transparent manner. Recent events, such as the COVID-19 crisis or the war between Ukraine and Russia, call for urgent and effective responses from governments and decision makers. Transparency, accountability, and corruption are all critical components of good governance. They are particularly important during times of crisis, such as natural disaster or armed conflicts, when government and non-governmental organizations must rapidly mobilize resources to respond to the needs of affected populations. In these situations, transparency and accountability are essential for ensuring that aid is distributed fairly, efficiently, and effectively, while corruption can undermine these efforts and exacerbate the suffering of those affected. The publication and dissemination of information allows citizens to monitor government performance. In this way, greater transparency reduces information asymmetries and increases citizens' trust in politicians. Transparency has a direct effect on government effectiveness and the efficiency of public spending. Despite the importance of transparency, governments may not provide all financial information to hide inefficient practices, especially in times of emergency. Political corruption, defined as the abuse of public power, office, or resources for private gain, is often encouraged during disasters. For example, in the case of Hurricane Katrina in the United States, some public employees were accused of soliciting bribes from contractors funded by public aid to defray the costs incurred. Poor quality governance, fraud with corruption and inequalities increases the impact of disasters. During disasters, corruption is a threat to humanitarian action because it can prevent aid from reaching the people who really need it. There is a strong relationship between the consequence of these disasters on living standards and the country's previous level of corruption. Government auditing can improve the transparency of public policies, promote proper control of the public sector, and reduce wasting. It contributes to the prevention and fight against corruption as it can reduce fraud and illegal practices. If auditors detect corruption, it can serve to prevent further corruption cases at the risk of being uncovered, which will reduce corruption cases. This is why transparency in the management of aid to Ukraine and possible corruption during the management of aid becomes a key aspect to be analyzed and will require exhaustive control by international bodies and auditors to ensure the proper functioning of the funds. To address these challenges, this paper examines the role of transparency and accountability in aid management during the Ukraine-Russia war. Various indicators of corruption are examined, together with the quality of accounting systems and access to information, to shed light on the relationship between transparency, corruption, and accountability in conflict settings. By examining these factors, the article provides insights into best practices for promoting transparency and accountability in aid management during times of war. Some practical implications for policymakers are proposed in order to ensure transparency, such as the creation of a committee in charge of auditing government action, the publication through a government transparency portal of each of the decreed actions, or the obligation to clearly define the roles and responsibilities of officials with the creation of effective mechanisms for coordination and communication between the different governmental bodies. Accountability and transparency in financial management can be closely related to various corruption indicators calculated by government agencies. Among these indicators, the Corruption Perception Index is one of the most important. This index measures the perception of corruption in a country or region and is based on the assessment of experts and public opinion. Transparent and rigorously audited financial management can help deter corruption and increase confidence in the government and its ability to manage public resources efficiently and effectively. This, in turn, can improve the perception of corruption in a country, which would be reflected in an improvement in its Corruption Perception Index ranking. Conversely, if financial management is not transparent and there is a perception of corruption in the allocation and use of resources, this can negatively affect a country's Corruption Perception Index ranking. Other widely used indicators of corruption are the World Bank's Control of Corruption Index (CCI) and the Absence of Corruption Indicator of the World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index. CCI captures perception of the extent to which public power is exercised for the benefit of private interests, thus encompassing multiple forms of corruption at both micro and macro levels. A high score means a low risk of corruption. The Rule of Law Index shows the rule of law landscape based on 8 factors: limits to government power, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory compliance, civil justice, and criminal justice. The assessment of corruption in government factors takes into account 3 forms of corruption: bribery, undue influence by public or private interest, and misappropriation of public funds. The indicator takes values on a scale from 0 to 1, where 0 represents extremely high corruption and 1 represents a total absence of corruption. Another indicator used to estimate the level of corruption in a country is the Bayesian Corruption Index, which is constructed using previous information on corruption in a country and updated through Bayesian estimates as new information is collected. To assess the degree of transparency and accountability in government budget systems, different indicators have been developed, such as the Open Budget Index and Strength of Supreme Audit Institution developed by the International Budget Partnership. The Open Budget Index measures the level of disclosure and accessibility of government budget information and reports on whether citizens have access to clear and complete information on the public budget, which in turn allows an assessment of whether governments are accountable and transparent in their financial management. The strength of Supreme Audit Institution measures the capacity of the institution in charge of auditing public accounts to carry out their work effectively and independently. It is based on a questionnaire that assesses several aspects of a Supreme Audit institution, including its legal framework, budget, staffing, audit planning, reporting, and follow-up. The SEA is responsible for conducting external audits of public accounts, ensuring the legality, regularity, and performance of public finances, and promoting transparency in government. Both indicators take values between 0 and 100. The higher the value, the greater the transparency and quality of the information provided. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia began in February 2022. Many countries have offered their support to Ukraine, for example with humanitarian aid, tanks, weapons and economic support, in order to fight the Russian invasion. The quantification of this aid, which is sometimes announced by the donor countries or institutions and sometimes by the Ukrainians themselves, is being monitored by the Ukraine Support Tracker, an observatory created by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. This figure shows the top 10 countries and institutions that have provided the most aid to Ukraine during the war until November 2022, based on the Kiel data. The United States is by far the country that has so far been most involved in helping Ukraine, followed by European Union institutions, which have mainly sent economic aid. The European Union institutions are followed in the ranking by the UK and Germany, which, like the USA, stand out mainly for sending military aid, while the European bloc has opted for the financial route. Within the European Union, Germany, Poland and France together contribute more than half of the European Union partners' contribution to Ukraine. It is also interesting to analyze which countries are providing the most aid to Ukraine by GDP volume, as small countries are providing a large amount of aid compared to larger ones. This figure shows that Estonia, Latvia and Poland lead in this ranking. It is worth noting that these countries are located particularly close to Ukraine and that, due to their proximity, their risk and concern is greater, so they are more involved and participate more in sending aid and assistance. If in addition to humanitarian, financial and military aid for Ukrainian refugees is considered, this ranking changes because some countries, especially those bordering Ukraine, have largely taken over support for refugees. Taking into account refugee reception, which represents a major effort for the bordering countries, the ranking is led by Estonia, Poland, Latvia, Czech Republic, and Lithuania. However, at the same time as this aid was being received, another of the country's major problems, corruption, became apparent. Political corruption before the war in Ukraine was widespread, with cases of prevarication and bribery by public officials. In 2021, Ukraine scored 32 points out of 100. 0 is very corrupt and 100 a set of corruption in the Corruption Perception Index. The country ranks 122 out of 118 in government corruption, making the Ukrainian public sector one of the most corrupt in the world. Recently, several Ukrainian officials have been accused of corruption related to the diversion of funds intended to resist the Russian invasion and support the population. Transparency during this emergency has also been questioned. It should be noted that during wartime it is difficult to maintain 100% transparency, as it entails military risk for the country in question. In order to provide an answer to be able to analyze the problem of transparency in aid to Ukraine, Athens et al. establishes a transparency indicator which can take a value from 0 to 5, where 0 indicates that the country is not at all transparent and 5 totally transparent. The construction of this indicator quantifying military, financial, and humanitarian aid transferred by governments to Ukraine is based on the sum of 5 subcomponents. 1. Designated website, either an official website on government aid to Ukraine. 1. Yes, 0. No. 2. Total value of commitments given. Is the total sum of Ukraine's support provided by the government? 1. Yes, 0. No. 3. Monetary value of individual items given by source. Share. Share of committed individuals' items in their database for which they have a monetary value provided by a source. 4. Government information on individual items shared. Share of committed individuals' items in their database for which they have an official source. And 5. Number of military items known. Share of committed and disclosed in-kind military items for which they had the exact number of units of weapons committed. This figure shows the scores obtained in the analyzed countries, namely G7 member countries, European Union countries, Australia, China, India, New Zealand, Norway, South Korea, Switzerland, Taiwan, and Turkey during the Ukraine-Russia war in terms of transparency. The relationship between the Transparency Index on support for the war in Ukraine, developed by Atenza et al., and the Corruption Perception Index was analyzed. The most transparent countries in the management of war aid to Ukraine also happen to be among those with the highest values in the Corruption Perception Index, with a positive correlation of 0.73 between the corruption index and the transparency indicator during the invasion of Ukraine. The importance of being a country with transparent practices and a relative low level of corruption is also reflected in the transparency of the management of support to Ukraine. The situation of countries such as Luxembourg, whose corruption index shows that it is quite transparent, and yet has a very low score on transparency about the support it has provided to Ukraine, is striking. On the opposite side, there is Malta, with a low level of transparency in general and a high level of transparency regarding its support for Ukraine. These results are robust in that the same conclusions are reached using other 2021 corruption indicators such as the CCI and the WJP's Sense of Corruption Indicator. For both indicators, the correlation with the Aid Management Transparency Index for Ukraine is above 0.7. Countries that score higher on these indicators and thus have lower corruption are those with better aid transparency rankings. So now we go with the main conclusions of this work and the policy implications. In times of war, transparency, accountability, and corruption become particularly salient issues. Governments and organizations that provide aid in conflict-affected regions must navigate complex political and social dynamics while maintaining the highest standards of transparency and accountability. However, the inherent difficulties of working in such volatile environments can create opportunities for corrupt practices to go unchecked. This work reflects the importance of transparency in government actions and in the accountability process. There is a real need for a transparent and accountable budget process that properly accounts for budget changes and supplemental appropriations in times of emergency. In the aftermath of disasters, significant flows of aid arrive quickly, which can provide an opportunity for fraud and corruption. In terms of aid volume, the United States is the leading aid donor, providing mostly military aid. Within the European Union, Germany, Poland, and France account for more than half of the European Union partners' bilateral contributions to Ukraine, when each country's aid delivery to Ukraine is ranked according to its GDP. Estonia, Latvia, and Poland lead. These countries are close to Ukraine, so their involvement and participation in sending aid and assistance is greater. Aid sent by other countries to Ukraine to deal with the invasion must also be transparent. By relating various corruption indices to transparency in the management of aid to Ukraine, a high correlation was found, highlighting that the most transparent countries in the management of aid to Ukraine tend to be those with the fewest cases of corruption. In addition, better accountability and quality is also associated with greater transparency. Extraordinary global governance is important during human-made disasters such as war, where accountability data, transfer made, aid granted, and humanitarian assistance are transparently reflected and allow inequalities to be reduced. The importance of transparency is vital for effective accountability and proper financial management, even more so in time of crisis, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic or the war in Ukraine. To ensure transparency, it is necessary to create a committee in charge of auditing each of the government's actions, in addition to involving citizens in decision making. Each of the approved decisions must be published online through a government transparency portal, detailing, for example, the amount, suppliers, materials, and duration, so that decision can be subject to public judgment. Auditing should play a key role in the fight against fraud and corruption in the public sector. There should be more transparent rules on lobbying and a public record of actions taken, so that any political decision can be scrutinized. Adequate follow-up of allegations of corruption should also be ensured, and protection should be given to citizens or officials who report any suspected cases of corruption they detect. To ensure transparency, a committee should be set up to audit the government's actions. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. You can see my email on the screen, so if you have any question, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.